It was a bright afternoon in the city, the kind where the sun reflected off the glass buildings and made everything look sharp and alive. People were rushing on the sidewalks, cars honking as they tried to move through the heavy traffic. The streets were busy, as usual, with the constant hum of the city creating a rhythm that everyone seemed to follow. Among the crowd was a police officer, walking quickly toward his patrol car. He had just received a call about a minor disturbance nearby and was in a hurry to reach the scene. His mind was focused on the report, thinking about what he might face when he got there, and he barely noticed the pedestrians around him. At the same time, a woman was crossing the street a few blocks away. She walked with purpose, carrying a small bag in her hand, her eyes scanning her surroundings as she navigated through the crowd. She had a calm and steady demeanor, the kind that made people feel at ease just by watching her. She was used to the city's chaos, and even though cars zipped by and people hurried past her, she moved with confidence and awareness. But as she reached the intersection, she did not notice the officer who was stepping out of his car in a rush, his focus entirely on the call he had received. The officer opened the door of his patrol car and stepped onto the street without looking carefully at his surroundings. He thought he had plenty of time to cross the road and reach the other side to get into position. But in that instant, everything happened too fast. The officer didn't see the woman until it was almost too late. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a sudden realization of danger that froze both of them. The moment stretched sharp and tense like the pause before thunder. Then there was impact. The officer accidentally hit the woman, causing her to stumble and fall to the ground. There was a sharp gasp from bystanders, a sudden chorus of shocked voices. People stopped in their tracks, some rushing to help, others standing frozen in disbelief. The woman hit the pavement hard, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. The sound of the city faded, replaced by the harsh rhythm of fear and concern. The officer's heart pounded in his chest. He quickly ran to her side, his hands shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tense, urgent. His uniform, usually a symbol of authority and control, felt heavy on him in that moment. He knelt beside her, scanning her for injuries, noticing that she was conscious but clearly hurt. She had a few scrapes on her hands and knees, and there was a bruise forming on her arm. Her bag had fallen to the ground, its contents scattered slightly. The woman looked up at him, her expression calm but firm. She did not scream or panic. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I'm all right, but you need to be careful." There was no anger in her voice, just a quiet firmness that made the officer feel both relieved and nervous at the same time. He nodded quickly, almost fumbling over his words. I didn't see you." "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice full of regret. He felt a knot of guilt tighten in his stomach, realizing that this accident could have been far worse. Bystanders had started to gather around, some calling for an ambulance, others trying to offer blankets or water. The atmosphere was tense but compassionate. People were concerned, but they were also aware that accidents happen, and there was a shared understanding in their eyes. The officer could feel the weight of their attention, and it made him even more anxious. He wanted to fix the situation, to make sure the woman was okay, and to take responsibility for what had happened. The woman, despite being hurt, remained composed. She accepted the help of a kind stranger who offered her a hand to sit up, and she adjusted her bag carefully. She looked around, taking in the scene, and her eyes met the officer's again. There was a moment of understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement that this was an accident, but also a reminder of how fragile life could be in a city that moved so quickly. The officer called for backup, explaining the situation over his radio, his voice tight with concern. He described the accident, the woman's condition, and requested medical assistance immediately. He stayed close to her, offering support, trying to keep her comfortable as the minutes felt like hours. He felt a mixture of fear, guilt, and a desire to do everything right. The city's noise seemed to fade into the background as he focused entirely on her well-being. The woman's composure never wavered. She spoke gently to the officer, offering reassurance despite her own discomfort. "Accidents happen. Let's just make sure we handle this properly," she said. Her calmness had a grounding effect, easing the officer's nerves slightly, but he could not shake the feeling that this incident would have consequences far beyond a simple collision. As the ambulance arrived, the officer helped guide the paramedics to the woman. They examined her carefully, checking her for injuries and making sure she was stable. The officer provided a clear account of what had happened, emphasizing that it was unintentional and that he had acted immediately to assist her. The paramedics nodded and worked efficiently, their presence bringing a small measure of relief to both the woman and the officer. While she was being prepared for transport, the officer noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The paramedics asked for her identification, and when they saw it, there was a moment of silence. He caught a glimpse of the credentials, and suddenly, he realized that this was no ordinary pedestrian. The woman he had accidentally knocked down was a federal judge. The weight of the situation hit him instantly. Everything changed in an instant, from a routine accident to something far more serious and consequential. The officer felt a cold wave of panic. He had not known her identity, and now the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The city around them seemed to blur, and he struggled to keep his emotions in check. He had always taken pride in his job, in being responsible and careful, but in that moment he felt exposed and vulnerable. He realized that this accident, though unintentional, could have repercussions that affected not just him but his entire career. The judge, meanwhile, remained calm. She did not raise her voice or display anger. Her eyes met the officer's, and there was a subtle acknowledgement of the human mistake that had occurred. She spoke to the paramedics in a steady voice, giving them the necessary information, and allowed herself to be treated without confrontation. Her professionalism and composure contrasted sharply with the officer's anxiety, highlighting the gravity of the moment and the importance of handling it with care. Bystanders continued to watch, some whispering among themselves, others quietly observing the unfolding scene. The city moved on around them, but this small intersection had become the center of a story that was far from over. The officer stood nearby, his hands still trembling slightly, thinking about the series of events that had led to this moment. He replayed the accident in his mind, analyzing every decision, every second, wishing he could turn back time. As the ambulance doors closed and the woman was safely inside, the officer took a deep breath. He knew that his responsibility did not end here. There would be reports to file, questions to answer, and an investigation to face. The weight of knowing her identity added an invisible pressure, a constant reminder that this was no ordinary accident. The officer's mind raced with possible outcomes, each one more daunting than the last. For the woman, the ride in the ambulance was a moment of reflection. She thought about the unpredictability of life, the sudden events that could change a day in an instant. She considered her role and her responsibilities, but also the human side of the officer who had made a mistake. She chose to approach the situation with balance, understanding that mistakes happen, even in the most careful of lives. The city continued its rhythm outside, unaware of the quiet drama that had just unfolded at one busy intersection. The officer watched the ambulance disappear into traffic, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over him. He knew that life would return to its normal pace, but for now, he was left to process the incident, the emotions, and the realization of who the woman truly was. In that moment, two lives had crossed in an unexpected way, connected by chance and human error. Both the officer and the woman would carry this experience with them, each reflecting on responsibility, empathy, and the fragile nature of daily life in the city. What had started as a normal day had turned into a story that neither of them would forget, and the consequences of that single moment were only beginning to unfold. The ambulance pulled away slowly, weaving through the busy city streets, lights flashing but siren muted to avoid panicking pedestrians. Inside, the judge sat calmly on the stretcher, her eyes observing everything around her. Despite the accident, she maintained a composed and professional demeanor, answering the paramedics' questions carefully and giving precise details about her condition. Her mind was already processing what had just happened, considering the impact of the accident and the actions of the officer who had hit her. She understood immediately that this was a human mistake, but she also knew that the situation had legal implications that could not be ignored. Back on the street, the officer remained frozen for a few moments, watching the ambulance disappear. The realization that he had accidentally injured a federal judge weighed heavily on him. His knees felt weak and his stomach churned with anxiety. He had dealt with minor accidents before, but nothing of this scale, and certainly never involving someone so prominent in the legal system. His mind raced with questions, wondering how he would explain the accident, what consequences he might face, and whether this incident could affect his career. He felt trapped in a whirlwind of fear and guilt, unsure of the next step. His fellow officers arrived shortly afterward, responding to the call. They surrounded him with calm but serious expressions, ready to assist in managing the situation. One of them placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, sensing his panic. "It was an accident," the colleague said quietly. "Just take a deep breath. We'll handle this." But the reassurance did little to ease the officer's worry. The knowledge of the woman's identity lingered in his mind like a shadow, making every thought heavier. Meanwhile, the paramedics carefully monitored the judge, ensuring she was stable and comfortable. They asked if she wanted to notify anyone about the accident, and she nodded, requesting that her assistant be contacted. Her assistant quickly arrived at the hospital, a mixture of concern and urgency in their steps. Ready to manage the situation and provide support, the judge's calm approach contrasted sharply with the tension felt by the officer, highlighting her ability to handle crises with grace and professionalism. At the police department, news of the incident had already reached the higher-ups. Reports circulated that a federal judge had been involved in an accident with one of their officers, and the atmosphere quickly became tense. Supervisors held quick meetings to determine the next steps, emphasizing that the situation required careful handling to ensure both legal propriety and public confidence. Internal discussions focused on reviewing the incident thoroughly, while minimizing public speculation. The officer was called into a private room, where he was asked to recount the events in detail. His voice shook slightly as he described the accident, trying to convey the unintentional nature of the collision and his immediate response. Back at the hospital, the judge was being examined by doctors. She remained composed, interacting politely with the staff while quietly reflecting on the sudden turn of events. She thought about how quickly life could change, how a simple walk across the street had turned into a situation of public interest. She acknowledged that accidents were part of life, but she also recognized the importance of accountability and proper procedure. Her calmness and thoughtful approach set a tone that influenced everyone around her, from medical staff to law enforcement officers. The officer, meanwhile, was struggling to regain his composure. He replayed the accident repeatedly in his mind, analyzing each moment and questioning if he could have acted differently. His training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, but this incident was different. The stakes felt higher, and he knew that any misstep in handling the aftermath could have serious repercussions. Fear and guilt battled with a sense of responsibility, creating a heavy burden on his shoulders. Public attention began to grow as the incident was quietly reported to local news outlets. Rumors started circulating that a federal judge had been involved in an accident with a police officer, sparking curiosity and concern. Some people expressed sympathy for the officer, emphasizing that accidents happen, while others debated accountability and public responsibility. The city became aware, in small whispers and online discussions, that this was not just a minor traffic incident, but a situation involving prominent figures. The officer was aware of the growing attention, which added to his anxiety and sense of urgency. The judge's assistant coordinated with the hospital staff and the court, ensuring that all procedures were followed. Despite her injury, the judge insisted on clarity and transparency, wanting to ensure that the incident was handled fairly for both her and the officer. She emphasized that while the accident required attention, it was essential to maintain perspective and not let fear or anger dictate the outcome. Her professionalism set an example for everyone involved, reinforcing the importance of fairness and responsibility. As the officer prepared to write his report, he felt the full weight of the situation. Every detail mattered, from the timing of the accident to the immediate response. He worked carefully, documenting the events honestly and accurately, knowing that this report would be reviewed by supervisors and possibly by external authorities. The pressure was immense, but he focused on being truthful and thorough, understanding that his integrity in this moment could influence the outcome significantly. While the judge was resting and recovering in the hospital, she took a moment to reflect privately. She thought about the human side of the situation, about the officer who had made a mistake in the rush of the city. She considered the many pressures that law enforcement officers faced daily, the split-second decisions they had to make, and the human errors that were sometimes unavoidable. Her reflections were not about leniency, but about understanding the broader picture. Recognizing that fairness required a balanced view, the officer was eventually called in for a more formal discussion with his superiors. They reviewed the accident, asked questions about his actions, and made notes about the circumstances. The conversation was serious but fair, focusing on understanding the situation rather than assigning immediate blame. His honesty and detailed account helped to clarify the events, though he still felt anxious about the potential consequences. The weight of knowing he had accidentally harmed someone of high legal authority lingered in his thoughts. Throughout the day, both the officer and the judge faced their own internal challenges. The officer grappled with guilt, fear, and the anticipation of judgment, while the judge balanced her personal discomfort with a sense of duty and fairness. Their perspectives, though very different, were connected by the shared experience of that brief but significant incident. Each moment became a lesson in human reaction, accountability, and the complexity of city life where chance encounters could carry unexpected consequences. As evening approached, the officer left the station, walking slowly as he tried to process the day. The city lights reflected on wet streets from a brief rain earlier, creating a quiet and reflective atmosphere. He thought about the accident, the judge, and the chain of events that had followed. The fear and anxiety were still present, but there was also a growing sense of resolve to handle the situation responsibly, to learn from the experience, and to act with integrity in the steps ahead. The judge, after receiving proper care and ensuring her condition was stable, began to consider the official steps that needed to be taken. She wanted the situation to be handled correctly, but also wanted to convey understanding and professionalism. She considered how her actions could influence the perception of the incident, and she resolved to approach the matter with balance, acknowledging the accident without letting anger or fear control her decisions. Her thoughtful approach created a model for resolving conflict with fairness and humanity. The day ended with both the officer and the judge reflecting privately on what had happened. Each of them felt the gravity of the incident, yet they also understood the importance of perspective, responsibility, and empathy. Though the accident had caused fear and tension, it had also brought lessons in patience, human error, and professionalism. The incident would continue to unfold in the coming days, but in that moment, both were aware that how they responded would shape the outcome far more than the accident itself. They had been connected by chance, but their actions and attitudes now defined the meaning of that encounter. The days following the accident were tense for everyone involved. The officer returned to his routine duties at the station, but nothing felt normal. He found himself replaying the incident in his mind repeatedly, imagining different scenarios and wondering what could have gone differently. Even the simple act of walking through the city now made him cautious, as if the entire world had shifted in a way he could not control. He knew that his report was being reviewed, that the internal investigation was underway, and that every word he had written could influence the outcome. Anxiety clung to him like a heavy coat, making every interaction and movement feel measured and uncertain. The internal investigation was formal and meticulous. Supervisors called the officer into meetings asking for detailed explanations about the accident, his movements, and his response afterward. They wanted to understand the sequence of events thoroughly, not only to determine accountability but also to prevent future incidents. The officer provided honest answers, admitting the mistake, explaining how quickly everything had happened, and expressing the immediate actions he had taken to assist the woman. His sincerity was evident, but he could feel the tension in the room, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Meanwhile, the judge had returned home after her brief hospital visit. Though she still felt the lingering aches from the fall, she spent time reflecting on the accident, thinking about how quickly ordinary moments could change. She also thought about the officer, a young man who had made a genuine mistake under pressure. Though she understood the law and her position, she also recognized the human element in every decision, especially in a busy city where even small distractions could lead to serious consequences. She wanted the investigation to be fair, not harsh, but she also wanted accountability, emphasizing the importance of responsibility without letting fear or anger dictate her response. The city, in its usual rhythm, started noticing the incident through news outlets. Reports emerged that a federal judge had been involved in an accident with a police officer, causing curiosity and discussion among citizens. Social media buzzed with speculation, some people expressing concern for the officer, others debating the responsibilities of public officials. While the media coverage was careful, it added pressure to an already delicate situation. The officer felt the eyes of the public, his community, and the department on him, amplifying his anxiety. He knew that his every action in the coming days would be scrutinized, and he tried to prepare mentally for the questions he would face. During this period, the officer's colleagues offered support in subtle ways. Some checked in quietly, asking if he was all right, while others provided guidance on navigating the investigation. Their presence was comforting, reminding him that he was not alone in facing the situation. At the same time, he felt a sense of isolation, knowing that despite support, he had to confront the consequences of the accident personally. He focused on maintaining honesty, showing his willingness to cooperate, and demonstrating that he was committed to learning from the experience. The judge, in her home and office, began coordinating with her staff to manage the legal and procedural aspects of the incident. She wanted to ensure that every step was conducted properly, that the investigation was thorough, and that her condition was documented accurately. She also reached out to colleagues for advice, considering how her actions could influence public perception and ensure fairness for the officer. Throughout all this, she maintained her composed demeanor, emphasizing balance between justice and understanding. As the investigation progressed, the officer received updates from the department about the formal proceedings. He was informed about the steps being taken, from reviewing traffic camera footage to interviewing witnesses. The process was detailed and deliberate, designed to gather facts and understand the situation fully. The officer cooperated fully, answering questions honestly and expressing genuine remorse for the accident. He wanted to make it clear that his actions were unintentional and that he had acted responsibly once the collision occurred. The judge, despite the discomfort and inconvenience caused by the accident, continued to emphasize fairness. She was aware that public opinion could be influenced by fear or misunderstanding, and she wanted to model a measured response. In conversations with her staff and colleagues, she spoke about the human side of the situation, reminding them that accidents were often unintentional and that the response to mistakes mattered as much as the mistakes themselves. Her approach reflected a deep understanding of human nature and the importance of compassion and judgment. Both the officer and the judge faced personal reflection during this time. The officer thought about the decisions he had made, the speed of his response, and the responsibility he carried as a law enforcement officer. He realized the importance of patience, awareness, and careful action, not just in emergencies but in everyday duties. The judge reflected on the fragility of life, the unpredictability of events, and the significance of approaching every situation with clarity, fairness, and empathy. Both were learning from the incident, albeit in different ways, and their experiences were shaping their perspectives on responsibility and humanity. As the days passed, the investigation continued with interviews from witnesses who had been at the scene. People described what they had seen, offering perspectives on the officer's actions and the woman's response. Their accounts added context, helping to create a complete picture of the incident. The officer listened to these reports, understanding that public perception mattered and that transparency was crucial. He felt the weight of accountability more acutely, knowing that people were observing not just the accident, but how it was handled by everyone involved. The judge also engaged in discussions with the hospital staff and her assistant about the documentation of her injuries and the medical care she received. She wanted every detail to be accurate and available if needed, not for punishment, but to ensure clarity and fairness in the investigation. She remained calm and measured in these discussions, showing respect to the medical team and emphasizing cooperation. Her approach conveyed authority and humanity simultaneously, creating a positive example for those around her. During this time, the officer also focused on improving his awareness and safety practices on duty. He reviewed procedures, attended briefings, and sought advice from senior colleagues on how to prevent similar incidents. While the accident could not be undone, he channeled his concern and guilt into proactive steps to be a more responsible officer in the future. This reflection allowed him to regain some control over the situation, transforming fear into purposeful action. Public interest remained moderate but respectful, with media coverage highlighting the accidental nature of the incident and the professionalism displayed by both parties. Some commentators discussed the pressures faced by law enforcement officers, while others emphasized the importance of accountability and caution. The city's attention reminded both the officer and the judge that their actions mattered not just to themselves, but to the community watching, making the careful handling of the situation even more important. Through all this, there were moments of personal connection and empathy. The officer in private conversations expressed his regret sincerely and reflected on the lessons he was learning. The judge, in her interactions, acknowledged the genuine remorse and responsibility demonstrated by the officer. Both recognized the human side of the situation, understanding that mistakes, while serious, were also opportunities for growth and understanding. These reflections helped to balance the tension and uncertainty with empathy and perspective. As the investigation neared its conclusion, both parties began to see the path toward resolution. The officer had provided a thorough account, demonstrated accountability, and taken steps to improve his awareness and response practices. The judge had ensured that the investigation remained fair, accurate, and balanced, emphasizing understanding without ignoring responsibility. Their shared experience had transformed from a moment of fear and tension into a lesson about human error, accountability, and the importance of responding with integrity. The formal report from the department summarized the findings, confirming that the accident was unintentional, that the officer had acted responsibly afterward, and that both parties had approached the situation with professionalism. Recommendations included continued awareness training for officers and acknowledgement of the judge's composed and fair response. The report emphasized learning and improvement rather than punitive measures, reflecting the balanced approach taken throughout the process. By the end of this period, both the officer and the judge had gained new perspectives. The officer had confronted fear, guilt, and responsibility, emerging with a deeper understanding of his role and the importance of careful action. The judge had balanced authority, empathy, and fairness, demonstrating how to handle unexpected challenges with grace and clarity. Their lives had intersected briefly, creating a shared experience that would leave a lasting impression on both. In the quiet moments after the investigation, the officer reflected on how a single instant of inattention had led to a situation of high stakes and public interest. He recognized the fragility of human life and the weight of responsibility carried by those in public service. The judge, in her reflections, thought about the unpredictability of life, the importance of compassion, and the ways in which fairness and humanity could guide responses to mistakes. Both understood that while the city moved on, the lessons of this incident would remain with them, shaping their perspectives, actions, and understanding of human connection for years to come. The following days brought a mix of emotions for both the officer and the judge. Life continued in the city with its constant noise and movement, but the incident lingered in their minds. The officer felt the weight of the accident pressing down on him, a constant reminder of how quickly a simple moment could change everything. He was careful in every step, every decision reflecting deeply on his responsibilities as a police officer. He began to pay more attention to pedestrians, traffic, and his surroundings, determined to prevent even the smallest mistake in the future. Despite the tension, he also realized that dwelling on guilt alone would not solve anything. He sought support from his colleagues and mentors, discussing the accident openly and honestly. These conversations allowed him to process his emotions, understand his mistakes, and consider practical steps for improvement. He began to focus on proactive measures like additional training and mindfulness exercises to strengthen his awareness and decision-making on duty. This process, though difficult, helped him regain a sense of control and purpose. Meanwhile, the judge returned to her routine, balancing her professional responsibilities with her personal recovery. She continued to reflect on the incident, considering not only her own experience but the perspective of the officer involved. She understood the pressures he faced, the speed at which decisions had to be made, and the human vulnerability that came with his position. She chose to approach the situation with compassion, emphasizing that accountability did not have to mean punishment when the actions were clearly accidental. Their lives, though different in many ways, had been connected by this brief and intense experience. The judge thought about how chance encounters could have long-lasting impacts and how empathy and understanding could shape outcomes in meaningful ways. She considered the broader message this incident could send to the community, emphasizing fairness, patience, and human responsibility. Her reflections helped her maintain a balanced perspective, recognizing both the seriousness of the accident and the importance of measured, thoughtful responses. Public attention had not disappeared entirely. Some media coverage continued, highlighting the professionalism and composure shown by both the officer and the judge. Social discussions emerged about the pressures faced by law enforcement officers and the human nature of mistakes. This attention, while lighter than the initial reports, reminded the officer that accountability extended beyond personal feelings. It involved public trust and the perception of integrity. He accepted this as part of his responsibility, striving to handle the situation with dignity and honesty. In private moments, the officer reflected on the human side of his role. He thought about the people he interacted with daily, the split-second decisions he had to make, and the impact those decisions could have. He considered the judge's calm and fair response as a model for how to handle conflict, realizing that empathy and patience could turn tense situations into opportunities for growth and understanding. This insight encouraged him to approach future incidents with a combination of caution, awareness, and humanity. The judge, on her side, shared her reflections with trusted colleagues. She spoke about the importance of understanding human error and the responsibility to guide others with fairness and compassion. She emphasized that accidents were not always the result of negligence, but often the product of circumstance, speed, and human vulnerability. Her perspective encouraged thoughtful discussion and influenced how others in her circle approached challenges, highlighting the value of empathy in leadership and decision-making. As the days passed, the officer and the judge experienced personal growth through the incident. The officer became more deliberate and reflective in his actions, understanding that responsibility required both awareness and humility. He learned that mistakes, though serious, could also serve as lessons, providing insight into how to act more carefully and thoughtfully in the future. The judge, meanwhile, reinforced her commitment to fairness and empathy, recognizing that her role required balancing authority with humanity, especially in situations where mistakes could have significant consequences. Interactions with others continued to shape their experiences. The officer received encouragement from colleagues who reminded him that everyone makes mistakes, and that learning from them was what mattered most. These words helped him regain confidence and a sense of direction. The judge, in discussions with her assistant and medical staff, highlighted the importance of clear communication, patience, and understanding when navigating complex situations. Their mutual focus on empathy and reflection influenced those around them, creating a ripple effect of thoughtful consideration. The officer also began sharing his experience in training sessions, using it as a case study for awareness and responsibility. He spoke about the accident openly, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, proper procedure, and empathy in interactions with the public. His reflections on the judge's composed response provided valuable lessons for others, demonstrating how calmness and professionalism could positively influence outcomes even in stressful situations. The judge continued to engage with her community, using the incident as a reminder of human responsibility and the importance of balanced judgment. She spoke about the value of understanding the context of mistakes, emphasizing that compassion and fairness were essential components of justice. Her approach reinforced trust, not only in her personal conduct but in the principles she represented as a federal judge. The incident became a teaching point, illustrating how careful reflection and empathy could guide both legal and personal responses. Both the officer and the judge found moments of quiet reflection in their personal lives. The officer walked through the city with heightened awareness, noticing the rhythm of pedestrians and the flow of traffic, appreciating the complexity and unpredictability of daily life. The judge considered the fragility of human interactions and the importance of measured, thoughtful responses to unforeseen events. These reflections grounded them, helping them process the incident and its broader implications. Despite the lingering tension, both individuals began to see a path toward closure. The officer's honesty, remorse, and proactive steps demonstrated his commitment to learning and accountability. The judge's fairness, calm, and emphasis on understanding highlighted the value of compassion in leadership and decision-making. Together, their experiences illustrated how a difficult incident could transform into an opportunity for personal growth, mutual respect, and insight into human behavior. Their story began to influence others indirectly. Colleagues, friends, and community members who learned about the incident reflected on the lessons it offered: awareness, responsibility, empathy, and the human element in every action. The city continued its rhythm, but within it, this story served as a quiet reminder that even brief moments could carry profound lessons. Both the officer and the judge became examples of how to respond to unexpected events with integrity and composure, demonstrating that fairness and humanity could coexist with accountability. In the end, the human side of the story prevailed. The officer had confronted his mistake and learned from it, developing a deeper understanding of responsibility and awareness. The judge had navigated the situation with calm and fairness, providing an example of empathy and professionalism. Their experiences intertwined briefly, leaving a lasting impression that went beyond the incident itself. The city moved forward, but the lessons learned remained, shaping their perspectives, actions, and approach to human interactions in meaningful ways. The incident had been a whirlwind, and now, as the final days of the investigation drew near, both the officer and the judge were preparing for closure. For the officer, the months had been intense. He had relived the accident countless times in his mind, thinking about how a few seconds of inattention had led to such serious consequences. Every day he reminded himself of the responsibility his position carried, and he focused on improving his awareness and decision-making. The accident had shaken him, but it had also inspired growth. He had taken every lesson seriously, from reviewing protocols to discussing situations with colleagues and mentors. The officer's colleagues continued to support him, quietly acknowledging the stress he had endured. Some had experienced similar moments in their careers, and they offered advice, encouragement, and understanding. These interactions reminded the officer that he was not alone, and that mistakes, while serious, could be used as lessons for personal and professional development. He reflected on how his perspective had changed, realizing that accountability was not just about facing consequences, but about learning and applying knowledge to prevent future errors. The judge, meanwhile, had also spent time reflecting on the incident. Her injuries had healed, but the mental and emotional impact remained. She thought about the officer and the pressures he faced, understanding that his mistake had not been intentional. She considered the broader lesson this incident offered, not just for herself but for the community, the legal system, and those who might find themselves in similar situations. She wanted her response to model fairness, empathy, and measured judgment, highlighting that mistakes, when handled responsibly, could become opportunities for learning and growth. The official investigation reached its conclusion. The report highlighted that the accident had been unintentional, that the officer had acted promptly and responsibly, and that the judge had responded with professionalism and composure. Recommendations were made to continue training for officers on situational awareness and pedestrian safety. The report emphasized learning and improvement over punishment, underscoring the human element of the incident. Both the officer and the judge received acknowledgement for their respective roles in ensuring the situation was handled appropriately.